passed away, it would have been 12, 13 years now. I'm still dealing with her death to this day. What a lot of people don't realize is when someone passes away, someone has to be responsible enough to transfer those assets from the decedent's name into the heirs' names, right? Yeah. It's really, really hard because most people don't, especially most American families, we don't communicate with our kids, this is where I bank, this is where I have my life insurance, this is who we owe money to, right? Those aren't common conversations. This is how you access my Gmail. Right? Simple things like that. When my mom passed away, back then in 2011, luckily things were still pretty analog, right? You received mailed statements in back then. It's worse today because now almost everything is digital statements now, so it's even harder. But back then, that's how I'd find out what she owned. I would get a statement in the mail, and I'm like, okay, cool, now I need to go to that bank, or I need to pay this creditor, things along those lines. But that's not everything. And to this day, there are some assets that I didn't know she owned, and after a period of time, it becomes abandoned property, and then you now need to work with the state to make a claim on it, and then transfer it to the heirs. Big lesson I learned from that is with all my families, I work really hard to understand all their assets. And it's really surprising how many families I work with that they don't even know what they own. And I have to tell them, if you don't even know where your bank accounts are, how do you think your kids are going to find out what it is?
Yeah. A lawyer that hasn't sold his soul to the devil, impossible you say? Well, I have found one. I've got our guest here, Aaron Fransua, probably the coolest name I have ever heard. I just feel I feel so fancy just saying your last name.
That's why I took it out. It rolls off the tongue real easily.
Yeah, you're great. No, Aaron, oh my gosh, this guy has had a heck of a story for one, and so we're super, super excited to have him. I am Mitch Bates with the Bridging Divides podcast with our co-host here.
Yes, Lindsay Taylor with the Hope Institute.
And so we're super, super excited to talk to you about Aaron and his story. Jaw-dropping is one way to say it. He's an estate attorney, also does business law we're just talking about. But we're just going to kind of talk about kind of how he got into that and really the lessons learned along the way, which I think it really, really fits. I know it might sound a little strange, having him on a mental health podcast, but really his story is just one of perseverance and love and coming together and just the perfect Bridging Divides theme. So, Aaron, thank you for being on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to share my mom's story, to let people know what happened and what people could be looking for their own families.
Yeah, 100%. And we were joking before about just kind of how we got to know each other and through networking and different things like that. Before I started networking, that wasn't really an area that I had thought that I would ever really connect to. Which everybody should have an estate plan for one. I mean,
for sure.
And I definitely need to get on that. So
my big thing is anyone over 18 should at least have some form of documentation, because a lot of people think estate plans are only for the rich, right? Only ones that have accumulated a lot of wealth. And the reality is an estate plan includes more than just management of your wealth, it's also management of your body, right? If you get into a car accident and you can't make medical decisions, who's going to make those decisions for you?
Right.
Anyone over 18, we do a big package for high school graduates.
Wow.
That gets them their healthcare power of attorney, financial power of attorney, so that mom and dad can still make medical and financial decisions for their kid if anything happens to them when they're in college.
Right. No, and again, I was definitely very surprised. Something that I never would have really thought about, because I'm just some broke dude with. Well, I have 50,000 kids, so I'm thinking about it now, and I'm just like, I probably should figure out. I don't know. I'm not gonna say that. Well, I don't know who would take them, but I'll have to have a list in case the first few say no. That's 6 kids. I don't know. That's a lot. That's a lot to take on.
That's a big commitment. That is, yes.
No, but so really, the reason I wanted to have you on again was just to share the story of your mom.
Yeah.
And how to deal with loss. Being prepared, fiscally is obviously. It takes a whole. You're dealing with all of the stress and the trauma and all of this turmoil emotionally to add all that stuff on top of it, I mean, it's a clear.
Yes.
I can see exactly why you would do what you do,
Yeah.
so that nobody else has to go through that.
Absolutely.
But can you share with us your story, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I tell people my journey to estate planning started in 2011. May 17th, 2011, I lost my mom. It was a sudden loss. My mom was like 65% of Americans, and that she didn't have an estate plan. Right? She probably either didn't think it was necessary, or maybe she didn't even know who to contact or what to do with it. But at the end of the day, she was young, and she had an unexpected death, and she just didn't have any of those documents at all. I was 23 years of age, so I was pretty young, a young adult. My younger sister, she was 17, so she was still a minor. She was 2 or 3 days away from her high school graduation when we found out. And my mom, it was an unplanned death. It wasn't like health-related reasons.
You said it was a murder-suicide.
Correct, yeah. There was
Wow.
domestic violence, murder-suicide.
There's no seeing that coming.
No. And especially with my mother, my mom was a probation officer for many years. She counseled domestic violence victims and offenders. She was well trained on the dynamics of domestic violence. But when it came to her own personal life, all that training kind of goes out the door. And we took actions before. Because I remember when I first came back from college, my mom pulled me to the side and told me, Steve, he's pulled me and he yelled at me. He said he has a gun in this house and he's not afraid to use it, and I'm scared and I don't know what to do. And I've always been legal ever since I was 18.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think that's why she came to me. And so I told her it was a Sunday, and I told her, well, the court's open up tomorrow morning. We could go to the courthouse and we could start taking some action. We'll get a restraining order. And so that's what we did. And we were able to get a restraining order, temporary restraining order. Lots of other issues kind of came up over the time. And the judge ultimately ended up continuing the restraining order for a while there. And somehow in between, they ended up getting in touch with one another. We took most of all of his assets and we put it in a storage unit and said, this is where you could go. We prepaid 3 months. Go ahead and get it whenever you want. But there's all your stuff.
You don't have to have any sort of connection.
Correct. But there's always one piece of property that gets left behind. And it was a dog. It was his dog. And the place that he moved into didn't allow for dogs. So we kept the animal and said, the next place you move to, you need to be able to find a place that allows for dogs. And, that's what the arrangement was. Well, my belief, and we've never been able to confirm this, but my belief was she was actually returning the dog to him because all of the dog's belongings were found in the back of the vehicle. And when she was taking the dog to him is when he took her life, and then he later took his life afterwards.
That is so traumatic.
It was.
And I wanted to back up for a minute because you said, she was a probation officer. She was really well versed in this realm, right? But personally struggled. And I think, that I shared my story on a podcast previously, but I lost my son in May of 2021. But that whole idea that nobody's immune. And here I am in this line of work. I lost my son to a fentanyl overdose. Here I am helping families struggling, whether their kids are struggling with suicidal ideation. I've worked in the school where kids are struggling with substance abuse, and I'm struggling with the same thing in my own home with my own son. And so I can relate to that so personally, and that's so hard.
It's hard when it's yourself or your family. It's hard to put all that education to use.
Yes.
It was like a deer in the headlights, I would assume.
Well, it's just life. And I think, it doesn't make, just because you have all this education, this knowledge, and this background, it doesn't make you immune.
Right.
That's truly what it is. We all struggle.
Yeah.
We do DBT skills groups here at the Hope Institute, and one parent that was in on one of our groups had said, I had shared something and she had thanked me for sharing, and she said, sometimes when I go into a therapist's office, I sit there and I think, is their house perfect? Do they have it all together? But she's like, when you hear therapists, share no, I've struggled with this with my own kids, it makes it real. And that's what this is,
Right.
And so, but man, how traumatic.
It was definitely a hard area. And we actually found out primarily through the news. It was breaking news. And as soon as I saw the house on there and it was murder-suicide, I knew exactly what had happened at that moment.
So you didn't get a call from the police or anything like, hey, I'm sorry to inform you?
No, later that night we did have someone from his children stop by the house and found out and notified us. We actually didn't formally hear from the police until the next day.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was a victim's advocate that came to the house.
How was talking to his kids?
Obviously we were nice and thank you for letting us know, but it was a tough area. I mean, I think for me at that moment in time, it was a lot of shock. And my priority at that time, because my sister was a minor, my dad was always an absent father, and so I had to assume that role of father real quick. And she was actually out, because again, she was a couple days away from her high school graduation. She was out with her friends when I found out. And so the priority at that point was to get her to a place where I could be there for her when she finds out. And so I was communicating with her boyfriend at the time, saying, you need to take her to, we met at my grandparents' house at that time. Take her to my grandparents' house. Can't say why, but you just need to take her there right now. And then, when she got there, was, letting her know and just being there with her. And I think that was kind of the biggest thing, is my priority was, I just want to be here for my sister. And so she was 100% my focus. Honestly, I don't have a lot of memories of when they came to the house to tell us. It was more focusing on how can I get my sister here and be there.
Yeah, because you were the father figure there, and so that's how old were you at that time?
23.
23.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a heck of a role to take at that age.
Yeah, I'd say I was a young 23. Right? I was kind of immature, just finishing college. I took a break from college around that time because I had a great job.
Yeah.
But yeah, at that moment, I vividly remember just that thought of, I need to grow up, I need to become this adult real quick. And I went back to school, got my degree. I ended up starting up a nonprofit foundation for domestic violence victims, a lot of fundraising, education campaigns in the community, and that ultimately ended up leading me to law school, which then took me into my estate planning class. And I remember taking that estate planning class, and this is what my mission in life is. This is what I should be doing. Because my mom would have had just even one or two of those documents in place. My family would have been so much easier, because, I haven't gotten into that quite yet, but there was, for a good 6 to 9 months after she passed away, just constant turmoil. I lost the house to foreclosure. There was some legal struggles with my biological father, just so I could get guardianship of my sister, so we could do simple things like health insurance.
Oh gosh.
Right? I've not heard
Easy
of,
things that nobody has a problem with.
Yeah, get her registered for FAFSA, get her registered for school. I didn't know where my mom finished off on all those things, so I basically had to restart the whole process. Yeah. I ended up losing the vehicle she had to Toyota for a little while there. And that turned into a huge,
that's a crazy story,
international campaign, because I was still making payments on it. And I even reached out to them like, hey, this is the situation. This vehicle has a lot of sentimental value. I would love to be able to take over this vehicle. Tell me what to do. They say fax over a letter, fax over a death certificate. Done. Next thing I know, they go to because it was also because of the murder-suicide, I wasn't able to actually get to her vehicle. The police impounded the vehicle immediately. And then Toyota went behind my back to the impound, took the vehicle, and so I was never even able to get any of her belongings out of there. Like, there was just constant struggle after struggle that I had to deal with after she passed away.
But again, could have been avoided should you have had the simple documents
absolutely
in place.
Right, if there was a will that named me to be guardian, I would have had other struggles with my father. I would have had the authority I needed to get FAFSA and health education, all those other things taken care of. I could have made more decisions faster. It would have been a much smoother process. And instead of unnecessarily dealing with creditors and legal disputes, I could have actually spent more time with my family, being present with them, grieving with them.
Grieving, yeah. So that's a really important aspect, right? And so that's obviously what you've become passionate about, in helping others. My question was going to be, and you kind of touched on it, like what was the next steps after that? Because I think, this being a mental health podcast, and really like our goal is to have people be able to come and listen and be like, gosh, I struggle with that same thing. How do I get through this? It's that recovery aspect. It's that, you know, we all have stories. We all have a story in life. We all have things we've been through. So yeah, what for you was the next steps in working through that loss and just that time, the struggle?
Great question. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of, I think there's two different ways, especially with, you know, my area of law and how I work with families that suffer these losses. There's really, you know, a couple different ways that people grieve. For me personally, my way of grieving was initially putting my head down and pushing through and getting a lot of work done. But with that being said, I was also very fortunate in that the state of Colorado provided victims advocates for both my sister and myself.
Oh, what a blessing.
And they provided us with a good year of therapy that we were able to go to and work through our grief issues, which I think is huge, and I recommend that for all of my clients after they lose a parent or a child, is you need to work through with a professional to understand these feelings you're going through. It's huge. It changes your personality in a lot of instances.
Oh, I always say it's a complete perspective changer.
Yeah.
Like, you don't see life through the same lens that you did prior to the loss.
Absolutely. And I think the other important thing is letting people help you. You know, when you're going through that shock, you can't think of, oh, did I eat today? Did I, you know, have I been paying my bills? You know, really, really simple things. Your focus is, I mean, you're just in a state of shock. People are approaching you, giving their condolences, and it's just, you forget basic needs of life. And especially, you know, there's, after someone passes away, there's a lot of legal issues that you have to deal with. How do you transfer this property that they all owned to your name or to whoever ultimately ends up getting it? How do you pay off those final debts? How do you do the final taxes? Things along those lines. That's where you need to lean into legal support. There's lawyers like myself out there that can help guide these families and take them step by step to transferring the assets, paying the final debts, and then making the final distributions to the heirs.
I love what you said about, you know, just kind of counseling your people in more than just kind of the legal aspect of it, because again, what you do takes so much off their plate, right? To be able to grieve, to lean on the loved ones, to, you know, all of that. How you're dealing with death like constantly. Now, obviously, you're not the ones treating them, but it's like I like that you have taken it on yourself to let them know, like, hey, like, this is one aspect of it. You gotta do this yourself.
Absolutely.
So how have you seen, like, what you have gone through make you better at what you do?
Well, I've kind of changed a lot of my processes when it comes to estate planning based on my own personal experiences, both with my mom, but also with other families that I've worked with over the years. You know, one great example. My mom passed away, it would have been 12, 13 years now. I'm still dealing with her death to this day. What a lot of people don't realize is when someone passes away, someone has to be responsible enough to transfer those assets from the decedent's name into the heirs' names, right? Yeah. It's really, really hard because most people don't, especially most American families, we don't communicate with our kids, this is where I bank, this is where I have my life insurance, this is who we owe money to, right? Those aren't common conversations. This is how you access my Gmail. Right? Simple things like that. When my mom passed away, back then in 2011, luckily things were still pretty analog, right? You received mailed statements in back then. It's worse today because now almost everything is digital statements now, so it's even harder. But back then, that's how I'd find out what she owned. I would get a statement in the mail, and I'm like, okay, cool, now I need to go to that bank, or I need to pay this creditor, things along those lines. But that's not everything. And to this day, there are some assets that I didn't know she owned, and after a period of time, it becomes abandoned property, and then you now need to work with the state to make a claim on it, and then transfer it to the heirs. So, big lesson I learned from that is with all my families, I work really hard to understand all their assets. And it's really surprising how many families I work with that they don't even know what they own. And I have to tell them, if you don't even know where your bank accounts are, how do you think your kids are going to find out what it is?
Yeah.
You're the one that opened those accounts. And so I work with them on getting a little bit more organized, and we write down every little bank account that they own, right? Where do you have a checking account, savings account? Where do you have CDs? Do you have any annuities? Well, what about your 401ks? Do you have any 403bs? We break down all their assets, and we get it organized, and that does a couple big things for us. One is, when they're done, they're going to receive an asset spreadsheet in that estate plan binder that tells their family, when I pass away, these are everything that I owned. Makes it so much easier for us to be able to contact all those entities and make claims and transfer those assets to where they wanted to. Right? We all work so hard to accrue these assets. Last thing we want is for it to go to the state of Arizona. We want it to go to our kids,
right,
or our loved ones.
Because what else are we working for?
Right.
And
then the other reason why I do it is, majority of families, after they're educated between the differences between wills and trusts, majority of them will choose to go with the trust-based estate plan. Well, the number one reason why trust-based estate plans fail is because families forget to, what we call, fund that trust. When I describe a trust, kind of think of it like I had a safe right over here, right? Everything I put inside that safe is protected by the safe. But if I take something out of the safe gives it no protections. A trust is very similar. You have to take everything you own and retitle it into that trust.
Oh, interesting.
So that the trust controls it. And if it's not entitled in the trust has no control. Yeah. And so a lot of families, what happens is they forget to actually put their bank accounts or their house or maybe a secondary property into the name of the trust. They pass away, and even though they spend all this time and energy building this trust, we're still stuck in probate because it was never funded in the trust.
Right.
So this asset spreadsheet not only helps organize the family and let the kids know what they own, but it gives us a line by line item plan on how we're going to move all those assets into the trust so that it actually works the way we intended to.
Awesome. No, that's amazing. So one of the questions I had, just to kind of circle back around, you'd mentioned you're still dealing. I mean, you still have things come up 13 years later, or you're dealing with that. How do you process those reminders, or like when that comes up? Like, do you have something that you do to help get through it, or like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so about once a year I'll log in. So at that time we lived in Colorado, so all of her property goes through the Colorado unclaimed properties. So once a year I'll log in, I'll take a look, and I'll see, is there anything new under her name? And if there is anything new under, then I work on the process of making a claim on it.
Okay, cool.
I only do it once a year because usually you'll find 2 or 3, and it's usually faster if I just do all 3 all at the same time versus if I check it maybe on a quarterly basis and then I'm having to do the work over and over again.
Yeah. So for those that kind of have gone through something similar, as far as, some of our viewers have gone through death of a loved one, how have you and your sister, like during that time or even now, how have you been able to lean on each other? Like what did that look like for you?
Yeah.
Like what were some of those things?
Like most brotherly sister relationships, we fought a lot growing up. After Mom's passing, though, we realized that we're each other's backs on this. We really grew close. I view her not just as my sister, but almost in a way, kind of like a daughter in a way. Like I've always viewed myself after Mom passed away as like, I'm responsible for you. Yeah. I want to make sure you're happy, safe, healthy, no matter what. And over the time, that relationship has kind of grown almost into a mentor in a way, right? Like this year they're doing taxes, helping her with, did you talk about this? Did you remember to look into this? Just help guiding her to grow more fuller into an adult and understand the complexities that this complicated world throws at us.
Because, I mean, she's gotta be, 30,
yeah, she's
29,
31 now.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I really kind of babied and sheltered her for a long time. I took care of all of her taxes for all those years, right? Because she was dealing with a lot. And I really wanted her to stay focused in on her education and just put your head down and continue to grow. And she worked on herself a lot over the years, and her and I have both immensely grown as individuals and emotionally, I'd say, as well.
Yeah. Can you share one of those strengths emotionally that you've gained through this?
I think one of the keys, and by the way, she works at my office as well.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
you guys are close in proximity as well.
Yeah, we work together on a regular basis, and I think it's great because, I mean, we understand what most families are going through after they lose a loved one. So she's able, she's generally the first person on the phone with most of our clients. She's able to help calm them down, explain to them, you know, that we're here to help. This is all that you need to be focusing in on first, right? We have a lot of empathy for these families, and we're able to work as a team to make sure that everyone understands what's next, and that we're there for them and their families. You know, if they're calling us after the death of a loved one, that's one area. And then when they come in for us pre-planning for an estate plan, it's making sure that they understand, you know, how do we put all these puzzle pieces, because every family is a little bit different. And so I view every family that comes to me as a new puzzle. How are we going to put these puzzle pieces together to achieve your new goal, but also make sure that the remainder of your family understands if there's ever an emergency that happens to you, how to get in touch with us, because we know everything about your family, and we can be there to hold your loved one's hands through those next steps.
I like that you point out that every family is different, and so you individualize it to that. And I often say grief is a very similar way. Like you said, everybody grieves differently. I always say grief is like a thumbprint. It's unique to each individual,
Absolutely.
right? And so your story is just a really beautiful, testament of, I took this really hard thing that I went through, and here's what I've done with that, and here's my passion now to like help other families that are going through a very difficult thing, right? And I think that's what's awesome too, is that, you know, not one single person, like, so for you, you went towards the estate planning piece, right? Because that was a really huge piece for you. That was really a big struggle. You know, you also said though that you did the nonprofit foundation for the domestic violence piece of it.
Correct.
Okay, so I just want to go back to that for a minute. What did you do with that? Because I think when we lose somebody, it's like, okay, again, we see life through a different perspective, right? And then a lot of times we take those experiences, and I think one way that we can move forward through these really difficult situations is to turn it into good in a way to help other families that might be going through a similar thing. So with this foundation, that's another aspect of something that you kind of took in your story and your loss. So what did you do with that?
So after she passed away, I think a big part of what I had a lot of questions, right? How did this happen? Why did this happen?
That's why. That's like the first question.
Yeah, and so I spent a lot of time digging in, reading through books and educating myself about domestic violence. And I realized, and unfortunately my mom, doing what she did with domestic violence, she already had books in the house. And so I was able to just kind of grab those off the bookshelf and immediately start reading through them. And one of the books, I don't remember what it is off the top of my head right now, but I found a lot of the articles and the chapters to be it was exactly what I lived through. And I never even realized all these years of, if someone asked, do you live in a domestic violence household? I would have never identified it as a domestic violence household, because it wasn't the stereotypical punching and strangling, things along those lines.
Interesting.
It was emotional abuse, financial control, things along those lines, slamming the doors, making it comfortable in the house. That's the type of DV that we grew up in. I would have never identified it as that. And as I was reading through this book, I was like, oh my gosh, majority of my childhood, I grew up in a DV household, and I never realized it.
Interesting.
And so I did like a blog, and I shared articles to try to, people need to understand more about domestic violence. This is much more complicated than what you think about as a stereotypical DV house. And so when I started this nonprofit, a lot of the big focus was education. Right, helping spread knowledge. And so we did 5K runs. And along the 5K runs, there would be facts about domestic violence, so that people would understand more about these complex issues that are raised inside of it. Of course, it would raise funds, which then we would give to local shelters to help them take care of other loved ones. And that was kind of our big primary focus, was fundraising and education. And over time, I realized that's helpful, but still not quite enough.
Yeah.
I got really fortunate, and one of the groups out there in Colorado was actively involved with helping get some laws changed. They knew my mom's story, and they asked if I would be interested, and I said, tell me more. And if this one particular law was in place, not only, I don't think it would have been the guarantee that she would have survived, but it was a big issue that I had in my mom's legal issues, is that, you know, it was 100% judge's discretion. The judge could decide whatever they wanted to, and judges are, at the end of the day, are nothing more than humans, and humans make mistakes, right? And so let's build in some objective criteria for evaluating certain situations, and that's what this law was all about. And I helped with that, and I helped testify and tell my mom's story to the Colorado Senate, the House, and help ultimately get some laws passed out there.
Amazing. Wow. And it's like, it's easy to be like, oh man, if I had done this, or if I had done that, then, you know, this could have been avoided. And it's like, okay, sure. But it's like, I guess that's when I think of like why, right? Why did something happen? I had a friend of mine who was you know, he had survived through a very long and strenuous cancer bout, and he's like, why me? Like, why did I survive? And I was like, you know, I think the why a lot of times is up to us.
Yeah. Right?
Like, or is more of, why is less important of a question as compared to what now? You know, how can we change things? Yeah. So what you're talking about is you've taken your struggle, your experience, and then that has lit a fire underneath you to make it so that other people don't have to suffer through what you suffered through. Yeah. You know, whether it's through the domestic violence issue that you also have a very, very close relationship with, but then also the estate plan, which again is where you're at now. Which I mean, what you do also with the Hope Institute is exactly, and it's exact same principle. You know, and what we all go through, if we can take those lemons and turn them into lemonade, you know, to where we can help somebody else avoid the heartache and the suffering, and allow healing for them, then we're good. Yeah. it serves a purpose at that point. You know?
It does, yeah. And like kind of what you mentioned, right? When you go through it, you gain a whole new perspective on life, and you're able to share that perspective with the community and help maybe prevent someone else from hopefully going through it, or if they are going through it, help guide them through it.
Yeah, and give them hope through it, right? Yeah. Like I
that's
think
the biggest thing.
Huge, right? I think we all need to know that we're not alone in these struggles. I think that's the thing. Sometimes when you go through various issues in life, but right, you know, for the purpose of this conversation, we're talking about grief. It's easy to feel like you're alone in that struggle. And so I think sharing these stories, it instills hope, and it also sends the message that you're not alone, and there's people that are out there that understand you and can support you. And going back to what you said in the beginning, that was really crucial too in your grieving journey, was that support between you and your sister, and finding that community support as well. So yeah, those are all really important aspects that we all need in order to get through these really difficult things. And so I think what you've done is beautiful, you know, and it was a journey. It seems like it's evolved over time of like, I started with this, you know, the domestic violence awareness, shifted into the estate planning. And also, I just want to mention, I think that's another really under talked about thing when we go through hard things in life, and especially death and loss, because we dealt with all those same things with our son, you know, some of those legal aspects and financial aspects, and you don't realize, like, not only are you going through this horribly traumatic thing, but now you have that aspect on top of it. So I really appreciate you bringing awareness to that, because I think that's kind of under talked about when we talk about these things, these struggles in life and death and loss.
Yeah, people ask me all the time. I remember early on I had one particular client ask me when we were doing their estate plan, why am I doing this? Like, what benefit do I get out of this? I'm like, well, A, you get more organized. You also know that your wishes are going to be effectuated. But really, for me, I view estate planning as a gift to your family. Because when it's done correctly, your family, it's so much easier for them. If you don't have an estate plan in place, that you're burdening your family. Someone has to deal with it somehow, some way. And if there's no plan in place, it's usually more complicated than it needs to be. Usually it's going to involve court. There's likely going to be some form of conflict. But if you take the time out of your day to pre-plan it, you're making it so much easier on your family that they don't have to deal with all these conflicts, the what ifs. What do you think mom or dad wanted? It's spelled out right there for them to take care of it all. And now, instead of them dealing with all these legal issues and Well, when it comes to legal issues, especially among siblings, the worst ones that I see are when brothers and sisters fight with each other, and because they feel it's not being fair or something along those lines, that family relationship is now ruined.
It's decimated.
They don't talk to each other afterwards, and that's...
So it's another tragedy on top of an already tragedy.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and I don't think any parent would want that to happen to their kids. And so if you can just put in documents in place that can help prevent that, let your families grieve and make it easier for them. I think it's a huge thing.
100%. No, and that's just another one of those things that it's, you're talking about letting people help you through what you're going through. This is essentially a way for the deceased to do the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to help you so that you can focus on what actually matters. Because at the end of the day, who freaking cares about the house and the money and all this other stuff?
Yeah.
It's the family. It's that bond, right?
Absolutely.
And so if you can just take care of it beforehand, then you can let your loved ones focus on what they actually need to focus on in that time.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, just amazing, Aaron. Thank you so much for coming on. I mean, if you guys have gotten value from this, please like and share, comment, questions. He's got social media as well, so if you want to reach out to him, we'll make sure that we put all the tags and everything appropriate here so that you can reach out to him. And just remember, guys, if you're going through something like this, before you have something like this happen, he's definitely the guy to talk to, right? So that if something like that happens to you, you can focus on what actually matters. Personally, you grieving, you've got to focus on that. You've got to take care of yourself and then be there for other people. And you can get through it. I mean, we say that so often, right? You grow through what you go through, and what you've done is a perfect example of that. It will make you stronger, and I know that it can seem hard at the time if you have lost a loved one to think that you will grow from this, but you will, and it will allow you to be there for other people when they need it as well. Yeah.
And I was just going to add, I think the aspect of knowing that you're not alone. I think that's another thing I really got from your story today, that we all go through these struggles, and there's other people out there that have been through similar things. And so just know you're not alone in your struggles.
And don't be afraid to ask for help, because people want to help you. Oftentimes I find people just don't know what to do, or how to offer that help. So don't be afraid to ask for the help.
Yeah.
But people are there.
Amazing. And with that, we love you, and we'll see you on the next one.